The Night Hunt, when humans became the hunters. Welcome to Galactic Audiobooks. I'm Max, and today I'll be your narrator. But before we dive into today's story, please take a moment to quickly check below and see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's completely free, and it helps ensure our videos appear more often in your feed. Let's get started. Part 1. The Kal'thari in the Shadows. Commander Zarlon of the Kal'thari warband stood tall at the edge of the dense jungle, overlooking the sprawling landscape of Earth. His elongated, vertical pupils shimmered with a faint glow in the near darkness, as his senses adapted to the shadows that enveloped him. The air was thick with moisture, clinging to his metallic armor as it reflected the faint moonlight. Above him, the jungle canopy stretched like an impenetrable fortress, and the distant calls of unknown creatures echoed from below, an unsettling symphony in the silence of the night. Zarlon could feel the weight of the jungle's darkness, a comforting embrace for his species. To the Kal'thari, the dark was not something to fear, but rather a domain they ruled with unmatched precision. Unlike the fragile species scattered across the galaxy, the Kal'thari thrived in the dark. Their enhanced vision, advanced night sight enabled them to see clearly in total blackness, with even the smallest movement visible to their eyes. Their sleek bodies were built for stealth, and their sensory organs could detect the subtlest shifts in the air, the tiniest vibrations in the ground. They were predators, and the night was their playground. As he observed the dense jungle below, Commander Zarlon couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. For centuries, the Kal'thari had been the apex hunters, feared by every species they encountered. Darkness was their ally, and they had perfected the art of hunting in it. Yet, the humans, these primitive creatures from Earth, were their target tonight. From the intelligence reports he had gathered, humans were soft, fragile creatures. They relied on artificial light for their survival, and their civilization had been built around it. This was a species that feared the dark. The Kal'thari considered it their right to invade, to hunt, and to conquer. The reports told Zarlon that these humans were vulnerable without their artificial lights. The world they inhabited was shrouded in darkness now, their power grid disabled in the targeted sector. Their communications were scrambled. Earth was blind to the impending attack, and the humans had no idea that their time had come. As Zarlon moved forward with his warband, each of his soldiers following silently behind him, he felt the familiar rush of excitement. The Kal'thari were made for this. The darkness was their weapon, their shield. To the humans, it was a weakness, a vulnerability that Zarlon and his warriors would exploit. His mind raced through the plan, swift, clean, and effective. The humans would never see them coming. In the silence of the night, Zarlon and his warband would decimate their defenses. By dawn, their resistance would be no more, and Earth would be theirs. But as they pressed on, moving like liquid shadows through the jungle, Zarlon felt something, a flicker of doubt, an odd sense of unease. Could it be that these primitive humans, these creatures who feared the night, had something that Zarlon hadn't anticipated? The thought was fleeting, a whisper in his mind that he immediately brushed aside. His mission was clear, and his confidence unwavering. The Kal'thari were hunters, and Earth would soon know the terror of being preyed upon by the masters of the dark. Part 2, The Mission and Initial Assumptions. Status Report. Zarlon subvocalized through his neural link, his voice low but sharp, carrying the weight of command. His eyes flicked across the darkness, assessing every angle of the situation. His soldiers were prepared, and the night was still, just the way he liked it. Perimeter secure, no signs of detection, Lieutenant Quest responded, his voice calm and measured, cutting through the silence like a blade. Human settlement ahead remains inactive. We should proceed. Zarlon's mandibles clicked in approval, a sound that echoed with satisfaction. The Kal'thari had never failed to hunt a species when the odds were in their favor. He had seen countless worlds fall under his warband's relentless assault, their populations wiped out with swift efficiency. Tonight would be no different. The humans were weak, and their time was running out. The dark was his to command, and it would swallow the pitiful resistance of this primitive species. Perfect, Zarlon muttered to himself, his voice a mere breath in the night air. These creatures fear the dark. They are nothing but prey. Zarlon's thoughts were razor sharp, focused entirely on the task at hand. The mission was simple: eliminate their leadership and break their will before the dawn. He had studied the humans, gathered the intelligence. Weak. Fragile. Dependent on their artificial lights to keep them safe. And here they were, blind in the dark, their power grid disabled, their communications scrambled. They had nowhere to hide. As Zarlon's eyes pierced through the canopy, he surveyed the human settlement below. The buildings set like dark monoliths against the landscape, their windows black and lifeless. There was no sign of life, no hint of activity. The humans had gone into hiding, just as he had predicted. They feared the night, and with their technology gone, they were nothing more than animals cowering in their dens. They don't even know we're here, Zarlon muttered, a satisfied smile curling his mandibles. His voice was quiet, but there was an undeniable sense of triumph in it. They'll wake up to chaos. By the time dawn comes, their leadership will be gone, and their resistance will crumble. This will be over before they even realize what's happened. He watched as his warband, silent and lethal, moved forward. They moved like liquid shadows, their exoskeletons blending seamlessly into the night. Their training was flawless. Every soldier knew their role, their steps calculated, their movements swift and quiet, like predators stalking their prey. The air was thick with anticipation. The Kal'thari warriors were equipped with bioengineered armor that not only protected them but also absorbed sound and heat, making them invisible to most detection systems. To the humans, they were ghosts, silent, deadly, and unstoppable. Zarlon advanced, his sharp senses alert to every shift in the environment. The dense jungle around him was alive with the sounds of distant creatures, the hum of nocturnal life pulsing through the air. But to him, it was all background noise. His focus was on the settlement below, on the humans who were already too late to save themselves. With their eyes unable to adjust to the dark as his did, they were hopelessly outmatched. With a flick of his taloned hand, Zarlon signaled to his warband. They split, surrounding the settlement, their movements so fluid, so synchronized, that they seemed to melt into the shadows themselves. The Kal'thari had hunted many species before, but this was different. These humans, so proud of their technology, so sure of their strength, would fall in the face of something they could never understand. Zarlon's mandibles clicked again, this time in frustration. Despite the overwhelming advantage, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. A whisper of doubt that he couldn't shake. Was this really going to be as easy as he thought? Could these weak, terrified humans actually pose a threat? He brushed the thought aside. It was nothing. Just the excitement of the hunt. They'll never see us coming, Zarlon whispered to himself, his voice full of dark amusement. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late. He signaled his warriors once more, and they moved deeper into the human settlement, their footsteps so light they left no trace behind. They would find the humans in their hiding places, disoriented and blind, and Zarlon would make sure they understood the true meaning of fear. They were predators, and tonight, Earth would learn that its darkness was theirs to command. Part 3, The Ambush Begins. The Kal'thari warband crept silently through the underbrush, their dark exoskeletons blending perfectly with the shadows. Zarlon led them to the outskirts of the human settlement, where the dense jungle began to open up into more exposed ground. He motioned for his team to split, surrounding the area, each soldier taking their position with the precision of a well-rehearsed symphony. The night was still, except for the distant chirps and calls of creatures in the jungle, oblivious to the deadly force closing in. Trooper Fork, the first soldier, moved forward cautiously, disruptor rifle raised, scanning the area with his enhanced vision. His senses, far sharper than any human's, detected even the smallest movement, the faintest shift in the air. Zarlon watched intently, his own senses tingling with the familiar rush of a hunt. But then, in the blink of an eye, Fork was gone. No sound. No warning. Just an eerie stillness where the soldier had been. Zarlon froze, his instincts flaring as a wave of cold realization hit him. Fork, he whispered into the neural link, his voice tight with disbelief. Report. Silence. The type of silence that crawled under the skin, sinking into the bones like a cold whisper. A wet splash suddenly hit Zarlon's face, cold and thick. He wiped it away, his breath catching in his throat as his eyes widened in horror. The liquid was purple Fork's blood. Fork's blood, Zarlon hissed, his voice low and deadly. Something's wrong. His mind raced, processing the unimaginable. The humans weren't supposed to be a threat. They were supposed to cower in fear, helpless without their artificial lights. How could one of his own soldiers disappear without a trace? The Kal'thari soldiers scanned the area, their enhanced vision piercing the dark, the world around them laid bare in crisp detail. Every shift of the air, every rustle in the leaves, every flicker of movement was immediately detected. But nothing stood out. No heat signatures. No signs of life. Yet something was lurking out there, something fast, something dangerous. Zarlon's jaw clenched. This wasn't right. Suddenly, a shrill scream tore through the night, sharp and filled with panic. Before Zarlon could even react, Trooper Quest was yanked into the air, his body soaring upward as if gripped by an unseen hand. His screams were cut short by the sickening snap of his spine, the sound echoing in the stillness of the jungle. His body twisted unnaturally before he was torn apart mid-air, his limbs flailing helplessly. The scream faded to nothing, leaving only the horrifying sound of snapping bones. The warband scrambled into chaos, their weapons raised, eyes darting in every direction. Zarlon's heart hammered in his chest. The humans, these insignificant creatures, were doing something he hadn't prepared for. They were supposed to be easy prey. What kind of ambush was this? Defensive positions. Zarlon barked, his voice betraying the unease creeping up his spine. He had led dozens of successful raids across the galaxy, but this felt different. Something was wrong. These humans weren't acting like prey. They were fighting back, and they were doing it with a savagery Zarlon hadn't anticipated. The warband formed a protective circle, scanning the darkness with their enhanced vision, weapons at the ready. They were hunters, they were predators. They should have had the upper hand. But the tension in the air was palpable. The jungle was alive with an unnatural stillness, like the calm before a storm. Every breath Zarlon took felt heavier, every movement more deliberate. His senses, once sharp and clear, felt clouded by something unknown. Another scream pierced the air, this time louder, filled with a frantic desperation. The Kal'thari soldiers turned, weapons raised, their eyes flashing with cold fury. They were on edge, aware that they were no longer in control. The shadows around them were shifting, moving with a purpose. But Zarlon couldn't see what was causing it. His warriors, trained to be the perfect predators in the dark, had become the hunted. Zarlon's instincts screamed at him to retreat, but the pride of his species, the thrill of the hunt, held him in place. "Stay focused," he shouted, his voice sharp. "We will find them, and we will end this." But as he spoke, the unmistakable sound of something moving rapidly through the trees reached his ears. It was unnatural, too fast. Zarlon's heart skipped a beat. Something in the shadows was closing in, and it wasn't human. The hunt had taken an unexpected turn. And Zarlon, once certain of his superiority, now felt a creeping sensation that the humans were not the prey, they were the predators. Part 4. The Fight Turns. Trooper Vorn's disruptor rifle hummed as it discharged, sending bright bursts of energy into the thick air. The flashes of light illuminated the darkness for a brief moment, but there was nothing, no target, no sign of the enemy. Just empty air. The unsettling silence that followed felt like a mocking reminder of the Kal'thari's disadvantage. They were hunters, not the hunted. Or so Zarlon had thought. Then, without warning, a massive explosion rocked the jungle, a shockwave that sent the Kal'thari soldiers flying in all directions. The ground trembled beneath them, and the air was filled with smoke and debris, momentarily blinding Zarlon's enhanced vision. He raised his arm to shield his eyes, but the force of the blast was overwhelming. His warband was disoriented, tossed like ragdolls in a storm of heat and light. When the smoke finally cleared, only one thing remained: silence. Zarlon's heart pounded in his chest. He had trained for this moment, prepared for every scenario, but this wasn't part of the plan. The humans had done something he didn't expect. They weren't just waiting and hiding. No, they were the ones pulling the strings. This wasn't an ambush, it was a trap. Zarlon's warband had been reduced to half its original number, their bodies scattered and bloodied. The rest of the squad, stunned and disoriented, struggled to regain control. Zarlon's mandibles clenched, his mind racing. They had always prided themselves on being the perfect predators, but now they were being hunted. The humans had turned the tables, and the realization sent a cold shiver through Zarlon's spine. Minutes dragged on in the eerie stillness of the jungle, the silence broken only by the distant rustle of leaves. The Kal'thari warband tried to regroup, their advanced sensory systems scanning the shadows, their enhanced hearing picking up every subtle movement. But something was wrong. The night, once their ally, now felt oppressive, suffocating. The dark that had always hidden their approach now seemed to conceal something far more dangerous. Zarlon's heart skipped a beat as a sound reached his ears: soft footsteps, barely perceptible, moving with an unnatural grace. His warriors couldn't react in time. They were too disoriented, too slow. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving like a wraith in the darkness. Zarlon's eyes widened, his pupils narrowing as he tried to track the figure. The human was tall, clad in dark, makeshift armor, and their face obscured by a mask that resembled a skull, adding an eerie and unsettling aura to their presence. In their hand, a jagged blade gleamed under the faint starlight, sharp and deadly, a tool of precision in the hands of someone who had mastered the art of the kill. "Hello," the human whispered, their voice cool, casual, as though they were greeting an old friend, rather than an enemy. The sound sent a chill crawling up Zarlon's spine, and for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Zarlon's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. The humans, these fragile, weak creatures, had learned to hunt. They had adapted, learned how to move in the dark, how to use the very shadows that once gave the Kal'thari their power. The human's eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence, and for the first time, Zarlon understood. The humans weren't afraid of the dark. They had embraced it, become its masters, just as the Kal'thari had. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The humans had taken the night from them. They were no longer the predators, they had become the prey. And now, Zarlon was staring into the face of that truth, a cold, calculating human who had turned his own strengths against him. Zarlon's mind raced as the human stepped closer, the faint sound of their footsteps barely making a sound, but each one resonated in Zarlon's skull like a drum beat, a reminder of his growing vulnerability. He could feel the cold sweat on his skin, his senses overwhelmed by the realization that they were no longer in control. The fight had turned, and Zarlon was on the losing side. The human's smile, hidden behind the skull mask, was a mocking reminder that they had outwitted the Kal'thari. They had been waiting, hunting, and now Zarlon and his warband were nothing more than prey. A new understanding washed over Zarlon: these humans weren't weak. They weren't helpless. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the Kal'thari had underestimated them. The hunt had begun. But this time, the humans were the ones in control. Part 5, The Realization. Trooper Vorn barely had time to aim his disruptor before the human was on him. The Kal'thari soldier's weapon was ripped from his hands in a blur of motion, a soundless strike that left him defenseless. The human moved with a fluidity that defied logic, like a predator in the night, and before Vorn could react, a jagged blade slashed through the air. The sound of metal cutting through flesh and armor echoed in the stillness, sharp and brutal. In one swift motion, the human wrenched Vorn's secondary heart from his chest, the life force of the Kal'thari soldier drained in an instant. Vorn's body jerked, his last breath caught in his throat, but the human didn't pause. They stood over him, watching as the life drained from his eyes, their hands still holding his heart, as though they reveled in the act. Zarlon was next. The moment he turned to flee, the human was upon him, impossibly fast. His heart raced, a desperate adrenaline surge pushing him forward, but it was futile. The human's grip, like iron, seized him by the arm, dragging him back with an impossible strength. Zarlon's eyes locked with the human's pale, cold eyes that gleamed with a chilling intensity, like polished glass reflecting the moonlight. "You thought you were the predators." The human's voice was low, amused, the words laced with a twisted smile that sent a jolt of dread through Zarlon's chest. "We were born for this." Zarlon struggled, every muscle in his body screaming in defiance. His enhanced strength, his biotechnological advancements, had always given him the upper hand until now. The human twisted his arm, and the sound of cracking bones echoed in the night air. Pain, sharp and unrelenting, flared through Zarlon's body, but his efforts to fight back were futile. The human didn't even break a sweat. With an unsettling calmness, the human began to methodically break Zarlon's exoskeleton, each movement precise, as though they were taking their time, savoring the process. The armor that had once been his greatest defense crumpled under the human's touch. Piece by piece, it was torn away, exposing the fragile, vulnerable body beneath. Zarlon's internal systems whirred in panic, but there was no escape. His vision blurred, the pain becoming unbearable, and his heart raced in terror not from fear of death, but from the realization that the predator was no longer him. The roles had shifted. The human's grip tightened, pulling Zarlon even closer, until he could feel the bones in his arm begin to shatter, the pressure too much to withstand. Every inch of his body screamed in agony, but his pride, the pride of the Kal'thari, kept him silent. For the first time in his life, Zarlon felt weak. "You're not the only ones who evolved for the night," the human continued, their voice cool and steady, as though explaining a simple fact. "We've been hunting in darkness for centuries. We made ourselves into predators. You just didn't think we could fight back." The words hit Zarlon like a physical blow. The humans weren't merely surviving in the dark. They had adapted. They had embraced it. The very thing that had made the Kal'thari the dominant species in the shadows had been seized and turned against them. These creatures, these seemingly fragile beings, had learned to hunt, not just for survival, but for the thrill of it. They had become predators in their own right, not by nature, but by choice, by necessity. The true horror of the situation sank in. The Kal'thari had always relied on the night to conceal them, to give them an edge. But now, the dark had betrayed them. The humans had not only taken control of the darkness, they had mastered it. And in doing so, they had made the Kal'thari their prey. Zarlon's vision darkened at the edges, his body breaking under the relentless pressure of the human's grip. He could no longer deny the truth: these humans were not helpless. They were not the weak creatures his species had assumed them to be. They had evolved in a way Zarlon had never considered. They had learned to adapt, to use the very things that had made the Kal'thari such formidable predators against them. They were the new masters of the dark, and Zarlon, for all his strength and cunning, was nothing more than a fleeting shadow in their hunt. The last thing Zarlon saw before the world went black was the cold, unfeeling eyes of the human, who had not only outsmarted him but had enjoyed every moment of it. Part 6, The Final Stand. Zarlon's body convulsed in pain as the human's grip tightened, relentless, unyielding. He tried to fight, tried to break free, but it was like trying to escape the grasp of the night itself. The human's strength was beyond anything Zarlon had ever known. No Kal'thari, no predator from the darkest corners of the galaxy, had ever held such power. It was impossible. It was unnatural. The darkness around him seemed to close in as his body grew weaker. His breath became shallow, the edges of his vision blurring. His body was on the verge of collapse, but his mind refused to give up. He fought, even as his limbs grew numb, even as his senses dulled, the human's grip like a vice around his bones. Then, as Zarlon's mind slipped into unconsciousness, he saw them. Figures humans emerged from the shadows, slipping through the jungle like phantoms, each one moving with purpose, with deadly grace. They were painted in dark colors, their faces obscured by masks, their movements fluid and controlled, blending into the night as if they were born from it. There was no panic, no fear in their eyes. Just a cold, calculating focus that was impossible to ignore. They were everywhere. Zarlon's final thought, before everything faded to black, was the realization that the Kal'thari had made a fatal mistake. The humans didn't just fight to survive. They fought because they wanted to. They hunted because they enjoyed it. It was a game to them, a thrill. And that was something the Kal'thari had never understood. The humans had become something more than mere survivors. They had evolved, adapted, and in doing so, they had taken the place of the predators. They were no longer the prey. They were the ones who controlled the hunt. As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, the human warriors emerged from the shadows, their bodies covered in the blood of their fallen enemies. The battlefield, once teeming with Kal'thari soldiers, was now littered with their broken bodies, their once mighty exoskeletons shattered and torn. The air was thick with the scent of death, and yet, the humans didn't seem fazed. There was no victory cry, no celebratory shout. They didn't even seem to care that they had won. To them, it wasn't about the war. It wasn't about conquest. It was just another hunt. The humans had hunted, and they had won. It was that simple. The Kal'thari, once the apex predators, had been brought to their knees, outsmarted and outmaneuvered by a species they had underestimated, by a species that thrived in the shadows, just like them. The last Kal'thari soldier, gravely wounded, dragged his broken body toward a hidden emergency beacon. His vision blurred, his strength fading with every painful step. The sound of his own labored breath was the only thing he could hear. The battlefield was silent now, the chaos of battle replaced by an eerie stillness. He had failed. His warband had failed. The Kal'thari were no longer the rulers of the night. The humans had taken their place, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. With a final, desperate push, he activated the emergency beacon. His trembling hand fell to the ground as he collapsed, knowing it was already too late. The Kal'thari would never regain control of the darkness. The humans were no longer prey. They had become the hunters. And in that moment, the last Kal'thari soldier realized the cold truth: they had lost. The humans were no longer weak. They were no longer a species that lived in fear of the dark. They had mastered it. And now, they would rule the night.